Today we are focusing on a budget and aesthetic AM5 build with the Ryzen 5 7500F. Let's get into it. The ASRock B650M Wi-Fi board. Now this is an amazingly priced board since I got it as an open box deal on Newegg, but we'll talk more about this soon. What's really first up is the Ryzen 5 7500F. This CPU I got on AliExpress for only $110, and this provides amazing performance similar to the Ryzen 5 7600, but at a much more affordable price. Next up, we have 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM from Silicon Power. Now, as you can see, there's not much of a heatsink on this thing, but I mean, for a little under $70, this is definitely still worth it. Second fourth slot, we pop these open, line up the RAM. Now what's left is a 1 terabyte NVMe from Silicon Power as well, and the speeds are up to 5,000 megahertz, I believe. First, we have to remove this beefy SSD heatsink. Look how thick this thing is. All right, now what we do, line up the little line right here. Nice little click. Now before you install this, make sure to remove the plastic. Now we can screw it in. Now we're done with the motherboard. Let's move on to the case. Before we install the motherboard, however, we need to make sure all the standoffs correspond with our motherboard. And since ours is micro ATX, we're not going to be using these bottom ones, so I'm going to go ahead and remove all of them. Next is installing the rest. Most micro ATX motherboards will have this exact layout. Now it's time to bust out the motherboard screws. We don't have an IO shield because it's already on the motherboard, which is nice. Now we slide it right in. Now I'm just going to go ahead and screw everything in. Now we have the motherboard all screwed in. Now all I like to do is plug in these cable extensions, which just makes it easier because next is installing the AIO. Apply some of that good old thermal paste. Got as much as I could out of that. First things first, remove the plastic. Otherwise the CPU will overheat. And do this. Put it in and twist. And now the tricky part. Now we're gonna make sure that these clips are straight so they can latch onto this bracket. I got one bracket in and the other. Now just a little bit of screwing. Apply pressure evenly on both sides. Now what's easiest to do next is take all of these cables that come from the case and plug them into the motherboard. The USB 3.0 has a plug down here. The HD audio is like always on the very bottom left. The USB-C is right in the right middle side. Lastly, the F panel plugs into the very bottom right. Now it's time to plug in all the fans. Now plugging in all the fans seems pretty scary, but every individual fan comes with a female and male header. So we're able to connect these. This fatter cable has prongs coming out. And with our new fan, we can plug it right in there. And now that is what we call daisy chained. And we can do the same thing with the RGB. And now pretty much just do that with the rest. Next up, we have an honestly overkill 750 watt 80 plus gold, everything you need in a power supply. To make it easier, I'm gonna plug in all of the cables that we need. First is the motherboard. With this model, we have VGA, which will be for the graphics card. And lastly, the CPU. And yeah, that's all we need. Make sure the fan is facing downwards, and we're gonna be putting it in with the outlet facing out. For aesthetic purposes, I'm using the screws that came with the case. Now it looks like a mess, but the last thing we have to do is actually just plug these cable extensions in to the power supply. After plugging in those cable extensions, now it's time to do the graphics card. The graphics card we'll be using is the RTX 3070. This is the gigabyte model. Boom. Let's see if I did this right. Looks like we're booting up, boys. And that is the build completed. Overall, I think it turned out super clean. And now we get to test out the benchmarks. So I think the PC performed pretty good, and the total cost was $784 exactly. Now, don't expect to get these exact prices, but it's definitely doable if you allow some AliExpress deals and getting that 3070 for around $250. With all of that, 100% I would recommend this build, even with the new GPUs coming out. The prices will lower, so if you see this in the future, I bet it's still worth it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.